Welcome to the Steady On podcast, where God's hard truth meets your hard story. I don't need to tell you that life gets hard. Life gets hard, really hard. But God's faithfulness is still active and alive in our hard. And these episodes are dedicated to remembering and claiming the promises of a faithful God. I'm your host, Angie Bauman. I'm a pastor and Bible teacher, founder of Steady On Ministries, and creator of the Step-by-Step Bible Study Method. But more than that, I'm a trauma and abuse survivor who carried a heavy weight of shame and worthlessness for many years. And I still struggle, but I live in much more freedom now because I know God through His Word and speak truth to the lies of the enemy with His Word. And that's what we do here. On Mondays, we take it in by studying the promises of God. And on Wednesdays, we live it out with teaching and testimony on the promises of God. So thank you for tuning in, my friend. You are the reason for this show. And I'm so very, very glad you are here. Let's get started. Hi, friend, and welcome into what I think is one of the most important conversations I've ever had in the well over 200 episodes on the show. Our guest today is Christy Osborne, a woman who has worked to be free from alcohol and is now sharing that journey with others. There's no alcohol in my home or in my life. None. I went through a short phase early in college after my abusive relationship ended that I experimented. But I was only 17 and too much of a rule follower to keep trying to get into places with friends older than me. And I quickly learned that working and achieving brought a temporary high that better suited my personality. And so work became my go-to. And over time, I've developed strong feelings about abstaining from alcohol. I don't offer many you musts to my boys. But anytime someone says something about drinking, I tell them, just don't. I work hard not to steer you wrong, I say, and I promise, and then they usually say it with me, nothing good comes from drinking. I can't point to any one thing that developed that stance. My uncle was an alcoholic. He's been sober and a man of faith for decades now, but I still remember stories from my childhood. He was abusive and dangerous when he drank. My grandfather, on the other side of my family, was addicted to pain medication. I don't know a lot of that story, but I know he was someone who professed a faith in Christ but didn't have much fruit that showed evidence of a relationship with Him. I don't know, friend. Maybe I've been protected from it because the depth of my brokenness would have surrendered to its numbing effects and I never would have surfaced again. I don't know. But I do know in the depths of my heart, I know. I am grateful it isn't a part of my life. And I also know some of you are struggling and you feel alone. Whatever you are reaching for, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. You're not. Hear Christy's encouragement today for yourself or for someone you love. No matter what role alcohol plays in your life, I hope you'll lean in today for this brave testimony. It's a conversation that needs to be had in our Christian circles, and it's not being had. At least not enough. Our verse this week is a promise. It's Psalm 23:1 from the King James Version. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Let's listen in. Christy, welcome to the Steady On community. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Me too. I'm very excited about this conversation. As I told you before we pressed record, I wonder if you'll just get us started by sharing just a little bit of your story. What was your relationship with wine and when did you begin to understand it was a problem?
Yeah. So, I was like kind of every other American gal. I think I first tried alcohol in high school, but didn't really go down that rabbit hole then because I didn't like being out of control. Went on to college. I went to USC in Southern California, was in a sorority, obviously tons of drinking. But and definitely, had the night out, but didn't get really fully into like getting, having lots and lots of drinks all the time. I certainly did my fair share of drinking, but it didn't feel like a problem then. And then I went to law school and I definitely feel like my drinking increased. As I look kind of back on my drinking story, I think that's probably the first time I began to give wine and alcohol a job. In the case of law school, it was definitely like to deal with all the stress of studying. I also met my now husband like the very first day of law school, and like wine and like alcohol ended up being really tied into our romance and our dating story. So it was like one of those things where I was like drinking to de-stress, but also drinking because it was fun and romantic and it felt like really mature. We studied abroad during our second year of law school, and I had already actually studied also abroad in college, both times in London. And so we spent a lot of time here. I'm based here now, and it was like it felt like really grown up. And after law school, we moved over here, and it was again the other job of being an expat, right? And this was the way that you meet people is you go to drinks. Everything over here is at the pub. Everything. I worked in Parliament for a little bit, and there are several pubs in the actual building. So my drinking kind of like increased. And again, I started to give it different jobs over time. And it was really then when I became a mom where it was like this reward. It was this thing that I felt like I needed to help me relax. It was my me time. It was everywhere you look. This is what you're supposed to be doing as a mom, is you're supposed to have the glass of wine in your hand, because life as a, being a young mother is really stressful. My second child, my son, was premature, and it was like a very traumatic birth, and I had postpartum, and I leaned into that mommy wine culture like trope very hard. Never talking about the fact that I was like struggling with postpartum, just feeling like, oh, well, everybody goes through this. I'm just going to keep on drinking. And then my mom passed away in 2018. And that's when I really started drinking heavily for grief. Again, it was like kind of the final job I gave alcohol was to help like numb me from this incredible pain of losing my mom. And we don't have to go into the whole relationship, but it was very complicated. She was my best friend, but she and I were not on great terms at the end, actually, because she was drinking and had become kind of a person I didn't recognize. She hadn't had anything to drink all throughout growing up, and then started drinking when I was in my mid-20s. And so she became this person I didn't recognize. And so it was a very, very traumatic experience for me when she passed away, because there was anger and sadness and all of these things that were wrapped up in this death, her death. And so from 2018 to 2020, I didn't want to be at home. I wanted to be out, or I wanted to have people over. I wanted to be drinking. I wanted to be in restaurants. I wanted to be in bars. And this is the thing, right? I'm saying I live in London, and it is actually really glamorous, right? So it's going out and putting on a fancy dress and a pair of heels and going someplace really pretty and glamorous, but then it like, always would be too late and too long, fall asleep in your makeup, not a good look. All of that. And so I did that for like 2 years. And the reason I know it's exactly 2 years is because on the anniversary of her death, 2 years on, I woke up and I just looked in the mirror and I said, Jesus, I just can't do this anymore. There wasn't a massive rock bottom. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It was just like, I was exhausted. I was totally disconnected from Jesus. I hadn't opened up my Bible and I don't even know how long. I, was making the odd church service because like I felt like I had to go because of the kids, and I just felt like I wasn't even someone that I really even recognized anymore. Completely lost my relationship with Jesus, and my marriage was in tatters. Like we were throwing around the divorce word, and just I realized I was not appreciating my children, like these two gifts from God that I had prayed for. I was just, I was lost. Wow. A long way of saying I was very lost. And in that moment, I just knew like I just had to take a break, and I didn't know what it meant. And I was very afraid of using the word alcoholic. I was afraid to like admit to anybody that this was like an issue, because the other thing too was it's like everybody's drinking also looked like mine, maybe not like the drinking at home, because obviously we never know that, but on the on the outside going out with friends, it looked all the same. And, again, like going back to the mommy wine culture thing, like that's what you're supposed to do when you have young kids. You're supposed to lean into the wine. So I ended up just beginning to read everything that I could get my hands on about drinking and alcohol and what it does to your brain and what it does to your body and how addictive it is and how it ruins your sleep and like all of these things. And the UK then went into like full lockdown 2 weeks later, which like I have to laugh at God because obviously COVID was horrible for so many people, but it ended up being like this ridiculously big, massive blessing for me because I had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
There was no place to talk about like, why aren't you drinking? Um, and so we were allowed over here in London one like walk. It was wild, one walk a day in the park. And so I would just walk and walk and walk. And I had, so many different books and podcasts. And I was just like finding different podcasts where other women, spoke about their problems with alcohol, but also really, really learning about what it was doing to me. And when I started to feel better and I realized, oh my gosh, I feel so much, I'm sleeping. I have so much more energy. My joy came back online. And then I just dove back into my Bible and all of the things. And it was just, I'm still learning and I'm still like loving this whole process of really figuring out like who I am and what I'm meant to talk about and what I'm here for and all of that good stuff. Yeah. So I tried to give you the cliff notes.
No, thank you so much. Let me just say thank you for allowing us in to this painful journey and allowing us into the Christy who fell asleep with her makeup on, not flat. We really appreciate that because it paints this picture and gives me such understanding of how the Lord, where you were when the Lord really invited you to take some steps towards this joy, my joy coming back online. I love that quote. I love it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. I mean, I don't love these things, but I'm like, those are really great things that you're saying. I want to rattle off a few things that I wrote down while you were talking that alcohol was providing for you, or you thought it was. You said it helped me de-stress. It helped me feel mature. It helped me feel romantic. It was a social connection. I built friendships this way. It was a reward. It was a comfort. It was a number. I don't know that that's a word, but right. Anything else? Like, I'm like, oh, she said this. She said this. Like Christy, we were using alcohol for all kinds of jobs, as you so well said. You gave it a lot of jobs. Am I missing anything that just comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, you said be social, but the one for me and the one that like the last one I really had to like deal with was to have fun.
Gotcha. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And especially because I think anytime we're trying to break a habit or anything like that, the people, there's good things in it or we wouldn't stay. It does good things for us or we wouldn't stay in it in some ways. Right. And so one of the big things I'm sure was the social thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Moving forward. So now were you an alcoholic?
So this is the thing, right? The medical community is actually moving away from that term.
Okay.
And they like to, like to use more and more alcohol use disorder.
Okay.
And for me personally, the word alcoholic really kept me stuck because to me, it meant all of the things that came with not being able to drink and admitting the fact that you are powerless and all of the things that come with AA. And there is no shade whatsoever to AA or however you deal with how you're drinking. Like all roads to recovery, I think are amazing. But for me, when I stumbled upon 2 Corinthians 12:9, his power is made perfect in my weakness. I was like, I felt that. I felt like I was broken, but I was also the most powerful I'd ever felt. And so
when you were drinking or without it?
No, when after, like when
gotcha.
when I realized, when I realized that this was like something I needed to figure out. So anyways, so there was all of that, right? The term alcoholic, it means you cannot drink and you're this one person and then there's all these other normal drinkers and it just doesn't leave any room for any of the gray area as a popular term now, drinker, right? Like, is alcohol just getting in the way? There's just so many other questions. And I think that term scares a lot of people. It
Yeah.
definitely scares a lot of women. Because it means like, oh my gosh, are you never going to be able to drink again? Are you going to be living a life of misery and missing out? Because we do, like you listed all the jobs I just gave alcohol. It takes time to work on them and figure them out. And if you go from 0 to 60 of like, nope, this is you can't drink ever again, without working on all of those benefits and jobs that you gave alcohol, it's really scary.
Yes.
So no, like my whole thing is, if you like that label, that's awesome. It's not for me. And so some people also don't like the word sober, but it's all over my my book and my coaching practice and everything like that. So I just think it's whatever works for you, but there are better questions, I think, than am I an alcoholic? It's, would I feel better if I wasn't drinking?
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, because I think one of the things that keeps us stuck, no matter what we're reaching for, that's other than Jesus, right? Is like, because the same thing in our life probably isn't going to be our de-stressor, the thing that helps us feel romantic, the thing that builds friendships, right? Like alcohol, when you're giving alcohol that many jobs, it's going to take time to, as you said, find other things and reach for other things that do those different jobs, right? This is a changing from the inside. And yeah, so I appreciate that. Tell me again what's the term that you already said that I've already forgotten that is not alcoholic?
Alcohol use disorder.
Alcohol use disorder. So that's really like, where is it getting in the way? Right?
And it's a spectrum, right? So you can have people that are fully physically dependent. You can have people that like, I mean, I work with women that have 1 or 2 drinks a week, but they just know it's not serving them.
Right.
And I think when you phrase it that way, it opens it up for everybody to ask the question, like, is this doing me any favors?
Right.
Is this like, am I being the best person, human, God, sister, daughter of the king that that I can be? All of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it asks the question, to what extent is this a disorder, or is this a problem, or is it getting in the way? Yeah. I love that. You mentioned maybe like a buzz phrase or something like with mommy wine culture. Unpack that a little bit. What is that?
Yeah. So the first time that I really saw mommy wine culture like loud and clear was a few months after I had stopped drinking. And it was during the pandemic. There was a massive Instagram campaign with, I won't name the actresses, but a bunch of actresses for Tropicana orange juice. And the whole thing was that they were making mimosas, so champagne and orange juice, and hiding from their kids in the bathroom. And it was, the tagline was like, hashtag take a me moment. And I was like, oh my gosh, we are telling moms to hide in their bathrooms with alcohol from their children while they're trying to homeschool and work from home and all these things. And I was just like, that's the last thing they need.
Yeah.
But I would have bought into it and I would have probably shared it, which is what they wanted to happen, but mommy wine culture is this whole messaging, and it's top down. It started with big alcohol, that moms need wine, mom needs alcohol because we're moms, because it's hard, because my baby whines, WHINE, so I whine, WINE. All those things. I mean, all you have to do really is stroll through Target, right, and see this on every water bottle and baby onesie,
and t-shirt and
t-shirt,
yes,
all
right.
of it. And it's just like, I get it, because I was one of the captains of the mommy wine culture squad. But what it's telling us is that we need something to help us be a parent, be a mom. But what it's actually doing, it's just the biggest, it's putting us completely on the back foot, right? Like, when we're drinking, we're actually not de-stressing. We're spiking our cortisol levels for 7 to 10 days after we've had a drink. So we're making everything more stressful. We're hijacking our sleep. And so, you're supposed to get 6 or 7 hours of REM sleep. You get 1 or 2 when you're drinking. So you're tired. And so all of these things are saying you need wine to be a mom, but like, that's actually just making you a tired, grumpy, stressed out mom.
Yeah. And encourages you to reach for it again to do the job, to cover the thing that it prevented you from having the
Yeah.
sleep and the, yeah, right. And so it's like, well, I
Yeah.
need more of this even. How or why do you think it pretends to be a form of self-care? Like, why do you think how do we how have we turned that into a form of self-care?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's part to do with all that messaging, right? And
Mm,
then um you get to a point, I think, where when you are a busy mom and you don't carve out other time for yourself,
that's good.
it's
Yeah.
an easy reach, right? And it can make you escape. It makes you escape the crying kids or the toddlers or the teens or whoever you've got at home. And so it's easy, but what people aren't talking about, I mean, now they are more and more, thank goodness, but that it's very, very addictive. And it is the third leading cause of preventable death in the US. And so it's the like all the health stuff is getting more and more. I mean, we can bang on and on about the cancer risks, but it's an easy grab, and people don't realize, I think, some of these things.
Yeah, and why not? You think, why do we downplay? Because you said, I didn't know that about the REM sleep. I didn't know that about the cortisone. I didn't know any of that. Why do you think we downplay that, or how do people get more educated on some truths about what it is and can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are at the very start of alcohol, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but alcohol going the way of the cigarette. It is linked to
Mm,
7 different types of cancer. Ireland this week is putting labels with the cancer risk on all wines and spirits and beers. The World Health Organization and American Cancer Society and everybody is now coming out saying there is no safe amount of alcohol. Canada did a 180 on all of their suggested, what the safe drinking guidelines, basically saying if you don't want to have a risk, don't drink. And so we're at the beginning of it. We're at
mm,
the beginning of it, but we also have a very, 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 very powerful big alcohol lobby. Um, and also people don't want to hear this.
yeah.
I didn't want to hear. If you would have told me this in 2017, 2015, I would have covered my ears and
La 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 la.
blocked you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because if it is
I need
all the
it.
jobs,
Yeah.
yeah, all the
Mhm.
jobs you said, if it's your one reward, if it's your one thing that you have for yourself, why do you want anybody telling you that that's not maybe great for you?
Yeah, yeah. It's probably been longer than I think, but it seems like there was quite a campaign some years back about like 1 glass of red wine a day. Like there's so many health benefits to it. And I think it was even linked to breast cancer prevention or something like pretty bold statements that, a glass a day is actually very good for you.
Yeah, they've most of those like early red wine's good for the heart thing have all been
Yes,
debunked
heart was
as,
it? Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
as being actually funded by big alcohol, those original studies. And so actually it happened this week in the UK. They're still trying to grasp to them, but it would literally be like if you had blueberry soup, right? And you dumped poison in it and you said, "Here, have some soup. It's good. It has some blueberry in it."
We
It makes no sense.
My husband and I have this saying at our house. It's always about the money. Because sometimes
Yeah.
when we talk about problems or whatever, we just kind of shake our head. We're like, it's always about the money, and that comes to
Yeah.
mind immediately as you're talking about the lobby and that. Yeah, it's a lot of it comes down to, not all of it probably, but it comes down to this money. People, there are people who make a lot of money off the mommy wine culture. There are people who make a lot of money off of campaigns of drink this in your bathroom, to have a me moment or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think we have to be careful about who we're feeding with our
Yeah.
beliefs for sure. So yeah, you talk now a lot about benefits of living alcohol free. Will you talk to us just a little bit about what you're seeing in your life and in the lives of other women you work with who make this decision?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I said one of my favorites already, the joy coming back
Love it.
online,
Hmm.
which was so amazing because when I learned that like I was chasing this, I've started to call it the dopamine smack, right? Like you get a 20-minute feeling of euphoria when you have a glass of wine. But, and this is what no one talks about, it can't be replicated after the first glass. You get a counteracting hormone called dynorphin, which brings you down. It's because God made us so amazing, right? He wants us to live in homeostasis. We're not supposed to be having these massive artificial levels of dopamine, But when you drink on a regular basis, your body gets used to that. And so you're constantly being flooded with dynorphin. So what I always joke about, like, I was walking around like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, right? And like my only happiness was in a glass of wine. And when I stopped doing that and everything kind of leveled out, which is different for everybody, everybody always asks me, how long is it going to take? I don't know. What it's different for everybody. But when it happened for me and I could feel it, everything kind of like, level out, I was finding really like real joy again in my kids laughing, or just like a sunny day, and just God's creation and his word and all of it. Like I was getting joy.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me. That was huge for me. And it hasn't stopped either. Like I still do have joy in the everyday. That's probably one of my favorite benefits. But also peace, freedom. When you're constantly when you go from drinking to, I think I should probably cut back, and you're in that like horrible place of like, should I have the next glass? Should I not have the next glass? How many should I have? I'll start tomorrow. All of that, making all the moderation rules for yourself. That is loud in your head, right? It's noisy. And when I didn't have to think about that anymore, and it left so much room for greater, better things, like that was just freedom.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just like peace, because I could sleep and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I see a peace and a joy in you as you're talking, and a freedom and a victory, and I know I'm sure there are good days and bad days, especially as you work with other women and you stay with them in their struggle too, but I can see it in you. And I'm so
Oh,
grateful for your willingness to share with us. Let me ask, I didn't pose this to you ahead of time, but I just feel sort of led right now. Somebody is listening and this is really hurting them and hitting home, but they haven't turned it off.
yeah.
What do you say to them? Where can they start if they're like, I don't want to know this, but I think I can't not know this anymore?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is you're not alone.
Mm,
You're definitely not alone. I was there, and there are so many other women that are there. So know that it's not just you. And the second thing I would say is just start getting really curious, ask yourself questions about like what the drinking is adding, why you're drinking it in the first place. Try to figure out some of those jobs and get really curious. Um, and then go on an experiment, like a true experiment. You don't even necessarily have to count days if you don't want to, but just try and see if life without it is better, and try and see if alcohol was really giving you all those things you were drinking it for, right? Like in the case of like connection, I drank to connect, but then I realized that how could I connect with someone if my brain wasn't able to make memories, and I wasn't able to, have the conversation. So just get really curious. Like my whole thing is I'm about grace and compassion, and just being really, really open, experimental, and curious about like, oh, maybe life is better without it. And maybe it's actually not giving me what I'm drinking it for.
I love that. Maybe life is better without it. And I even wonder if maybe life, even what's not good in life, is not as bad
Yeah.
or as hard to deal with as what I'm believing that it is. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we just get overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
in that experiment, can we break it down just a little bit and continue to ask the Lord for help and say, let me just look at this one thing at a time, because I hear you, like
Yeah.
when your mom passed, the complicated relationship, her drinking, the littles at home, the stress, the desire to socialize, the marriage that was struggling, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think, when we give something that one job and say, just take it all away, but the reality is the Lord, like you said, the Lord gives us grace and strength and weakness and all that so that we can begin to say, okay, what do I do today? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
Oh, so good talking to you, Christy.
Oh
Christy
my
can be found
gosh.
at lovelifesober.co.uk. And the podcast, I love this so much, is this is a great name for a podcast.
Haven't you heard it? Having you heard it in Bible study or church somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
The podcast name is But Jesus Drank Wine and Other Stories That Kept Us Stuck. What a great, and you have a co-host for that. Do I remember that correctly? Yes. So I think, friend, too, if you want to get curious, check out her podcast and listen to what they're talking about. And maybe check out Christy's website and see. I know there are some references and resources and things there for you as well. So, Christy, thank you so much again for sharing with us and teaching us and helping us look at something, as you said, that really we're not talking about enough just yet.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You are welcome. And thank you, friend, for listening. Until next time, peace. Thank you, Christy, for sharing your story. If you are in a crisis, you can call or text 988 or visit samhsa.gov. That's Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And you can take steps toward healing. That information is also in today's show notes. Please hear again the promise in Psalm 23:1. This is the New King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He really will provide all the provision and protection we will ever need. If you haven't yet, I hope you will listen to Monday's Take It In, where Susie Crosby joins me to focus on the word want. Next week, our Take It In verse will be 2 Corinthians 10:5, which reminds us to take our thoughts captive. And my guest will be Kelly Balleri. Kelly will be with us to encourage us to seize the power of God's word and exchange lies for truth. It sounds like a good fit to what we talk about here, doesn't it? If you haven't yet, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever directory you're using to listen. It only takes a second, and it guarantees you'll see new episodes as soon as they drop. And if someone came to mind today as you were listening to my conversation with Christy, I would love it if you would share the episode with them. Inviting them into what we're doing here is another great way to support the show. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.